Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 9 articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express, especially from the perspective of the upcoming mains exam. In the first article, we'll talk about a very important principle of India's foreign policy, that is strategic autonomy. In the second article, we'll talk about the importance, issues, and the way forward with respect to India's informal sector. In the third article, we'll talk about the evolution of Collegium System and the issues associated with it. In the fourth article, we'll talk about what is Planetary Defence and what is ISRO doing for it. In the fifth article, we'll talk about the very important concept of heat dome. Finally, in the Prelims Snippet section, we'll have a discussion with respect to some of the very important topics for the prelims exam. Now, the very first article is with respect to the strategic autonomy. So recently, the US Ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, he has made a comment with respect to one of the very important principles of India's foreign policy, that is strategic autonomy. He has said that there is no such thing as strategic autonomy when it comes in the times of conflict. Now, this comes in the background of the West's allegation of Russia's atrocities in Ukraine. This also comes in the background of Prime Minister's visit to Russia, which has raised a concern in the US. Now, this is with respect to GS2, Indian foreign policy and international relations. Now, what do we mean by strategic autonomy? See, strategic autonomy, it's the ability of a state to pursue its own national interests and its preferred foreign policy choices without being constrained by the other states. That is how we define the strategic autonomy. Now, see, in India's context, this primarily implies securing its territorial integrity and securing its sovereignty, both internal and external. Now, what is the primary reason that we give so much importance to this principle of strategic autonomy? See, India was ruled by British, and the Britishers exploited India in the very extreme ways for their own selfish motives. Now, after independence, that was the reason that India gave too much importance to non-interference and to autonomy in decision making. And that's the reason that we pay so much heed or importance to this concept of strategic autonomy. Now, let's examine how this strategic autonomy, the principle, has evolved. But before examining that, what we need to know is a concept of the world order, right? So first of all, what do we mean by world order? See, world order is nothing but the arrangement of power and authority among different countries. The way the power and authority is distributed among different countries, that is known as world order. And this world order has kept on changing, right? For example, before a few centuries, we had the Dutch who had a dominance. Then they were replaced by the Britishers who maintained the dominance for some years. Then after the Second World War, what we saw was the sort of dominance by the US. And now what we are witnessing is the gradual rise of China. Right. So that is what we actually analyze that is how we analyze the world order, right? Now, if we see this changing world order from the lens of India's foreign policy, we would see how this strategic autonomy has evolved. Let's first talk about the first phase. So the first phase started in the year 1947 and it was till 1961. Now, this was the phase of a bipolar world order. Right. Bipolar world order means that it was a world which was led by two power blocks, one led by the US and the other led by the erstwhile USSR, right? Now, it was during this phase that India adopted the course of non-alignment, right? And it was in the year 1961 that India played a very important role in the formulation, in the institutionalization of the non-aligned movement, right? Next is the Panchsheel policy. That is the arrangement, the agreement with respect to how we are going to have relations with other countries, especially in the context of China. So it was Pandit Nehru who actually started or came forward with the idea of Panchsheel policy. Then what we saw was that it was during this phase that we gave too much importance to the preservation of autonomy and securing the territorial integrity of the country, right? Consolidating the territorial integrity of the country. Now, this phase was followed by the second phase, which started in 1962, that is after the war with China, right? And it was till 1971. Now, see, this was a phase of realism, right? And India, during this phase after the war with China, made some of the very pragmatic choices. For example, it was in the year 1964 that India made a defense arrangement with the United States, right? Now, this phase was followed by the third phase, that is in 1971 till 1991, and this phase was of regional assertion. So, India in this phase, it asserted itself regionally. Now, this regional assertion was manifested in the form of the tilt towards the USSR, in the form of the signing of the Indo-Soviet Treaty on Peace, Friendship and Cooperation, right? Next was the involvement of India when it comes to 71 war, and it led to the creation of Bangladesh, right? Next was the nuclear test, which was conducted in Pokhran, right, also known as the Smiling Buddha, in 1974. Now, this test, after this test, there were several sanctions which were imposed by the US on India, right? Next was the involvement of India in peacekeeping operations. I hope you know what is IPKF, India Peacekeeping Forces, and their involvement in Sri Lanka, right? However, there was also a development of an axis, and this was among three countries, that is the US, China and Pakistan. Now, this threatened the prospects of India as emerging a regional power, right? This phase was then taken over by the next phase, and that is when India started to witness the strategic autonomy, and it was in the year 1991 till the year 2005. Now, the economic reforms which were initiated during this phase, it led to the development of a strategic outlook, right? Then we also started having multi-alignment with different countries. For example, with US, India started to engage with US, India started to engage with, let's say, Israel, India started to engage with the Southeast Asian countries. Now, can you tell me before we go ahead that it was in which year that India launched the Look East policy and under whose prime ministership, right? Let me see who answers first in the comment section. Now, this phase was then taken over by the next phase, and it was the fifth phase. Now, it was in this phase that it started in the year 2005, and still we are witnessing this phase where India has shown its strategic autonomy in a multipolar world, right? Now, the manifestation of this phase can be seen in different instances. For example, there has been a shift from a P2 mindset, that is the permanent two. That is, we are not just giving importance to the US and China, but we are also engaging with some of the middle powers. India is also engaging with some of the countries of the third world countries, and in the form of South-South cooperation, right? Then India is focusing upon a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Now, this signifies the importance of the regional world order. That is, India wants to emerge as a regional leader in the Indo-Pacific construct. Then, balancing diplomacy. Now, India has been actively engaging in balancing the diplomacy when it comes to dealing with Russia, China on one hand, or dealing with US or other Western powers on the other, right? Next is that there has been an emphasis on the de-hyphenation policy. That is, India is compartmentalizing its relationship with different countries. For example, our relationship with Israel stands on its merit, and our relationship with Palestine stands on its merit. Next is the issue-based cooperation. That is, India has been actively engaging with different countries when it comes to specific issues. For example, we are engaging with UAE, we are engaging with Australia, we are engaging with Israel on different fronts. For example, investments, technology, or security. Then there has been an intensified cooperation with middle powers. For example, Germany, for example, Japan, South Korea. Now, this is in the form of the technological domain, right? Next is the critical defense deal. You must be aware that US has designated India as a major defense partner in the year 2016, right? And on the other hand, India has been procuring the very important S-400 Triumph missile defense system from Russia, right? Now, this emphasizes the importance of India when it comes to the relationship with US or with Russia. Now, next is the 2+2 dialogue, where India has been interacting with different countries at two fronts, at the foreign minister level and at the defense minister level, right? For example, we have got the 2+2 dialogue with Russia, we have with Australia, we have with US, right? Next is the military logistics agreement. So, India has actually partnered with different countries when it comes to the logistics agreement. For example, India has LEMOA when it comes to US. For example, India has RELOS. When it comes to Russia, India has also a logistics partnership with France, with Singapore, right? Next is the pulling out of the RCEP. See, RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now, this is primarily a China-led economic setup. Now, India came out of it right? The second reason was that it compromised the domestic industries in India, right? So that was the reason that India came out of the RCEP. Next is the use of hard power. India at several occasions have used hard power when it comes to the surgical strikes in Pakistan, or when it comes to the surgical strikes in Myanmar, right? So India has used the hard power. Next is expanding the soft power. India has been actively engaging to increase its soft power. For example, the International Yoga Day, for example, the International Solar Alliance, or let's say the South Asian Satellite, right? So that is where we see the manifestation of the strategic autonomy. Now, what are the challenges when it comes to the strategic autonomy? First is the perception of weakness. See, in order to become a great power, you need to have a stand when it comes to international issues. But what has been alleged, there have been allegations by different countries that under the guise of strategic autonomy, India has failed to take stand on crucial international matters. For example, when it comes to the Myanmar's atrocities, the atrocities committed by the Myanmar's Janta on its people, or when it comes to the Russian atrocities committed on the Ukrainians, right? That is the first thing. Second is the fear of becoming US ally. See, US has never liked India's concept of strategic autonomy, and that is the reason that it has time and again forced India, narrowed the choices. For example, its sanctions on the Iranian oil supplies, or its concerns with respect to the import of arms from Russia to India, right? So these are some of the issues. Next is the assertive rise of China. Not just the assertive rise of China, but also the aggressions by China on the borders. So China has been showing aggressions when it comes to the Galwan clashes, when it comes to the Doklam clashes, right? Moreover, China is having an all-weather friendship with Pakistan. Now, this is obviously not good for India's interests, and that is the reason that India has been tilting towards the West, and this compromises India's strategic autonomy. Next is the assertion of power. See, for India, the Indian Ocean region is very important, and it highlights itself as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. Now, this obviously leads to more confrontation in the forms of the arms race, right? Next is dependence on the other developed countries for economic growth. Now, India has been, especially when it comes to the technological domain, India has been greatly dependent on these countries. For example, when it comes to critical defense technological platforms, right? So obviously, once you are critically dependent on the other countries, especially for these defense platform, you will compromise the strategic autonomy. Now, what should be the way forward? See, the first thing is that India needs to have a multi-vector foreign policy approach. What do we mean by this? India needs to strengthen the interactions with different countries, keeping the national interest as the basis. So the national interest has to be the supreme. Next is creative diplomacy and flexibility. India needs to have more skilled diplomacy so that it can have that diplomatic maneuvering when it comes to interactions with different countries, and then secure its interest. Next is cooperate and compete. It's not just about cooperation with countries. It's also about competing so that India can emerge as a regional superpower, right? Next is active engagement with middle powers. When it comes to the middle powers, for example, Japan, Germany, or South Korea, India needs to actively engage, because these are some of the countries which are technological powerhouses, right? Next is utilizing the multilateral institutions. Now, this is very important. When it comes to India's relationship with the third world countries, these multilateral institutions need to be used so that India can actively engage with these countries, especially the countries of Africa, right? So what we see is definitely that strategic autonomy is one of the core principles, is a USP of India's foreign policy. However, India needs to strengthen itself economically, militarily, so that it can really, in real sense, it can exercise that autonomy in its strategic decisions. Now, before going to another topic, let me give you a mains question, a practice question. The question says, the present day geopolitical and geostrategic circumstances present a multifaceted challenge to India's foreign policy. Discuss this statement in the light of India's strategic autonomy principle. Do write an answer and then post it in the comment section. So the next topic is with respect to the informal sector. So recently, the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation has released a survey, and it talks about that there has been a reduction in the number of informal workers by 1.5% if we compare the year 2015-16 and 2022-23, right? Now, this is with respect to GS3, Indian economy and issues. So we'll see what is the importance of informal workers and what are the issues associated with them, and then what can be the way forward. Now, See, the informal sector, it is characterized by lack of job security. It is characterized by limited social security. It is then characterized by weak bargaining power, right? So these are the characteristics of the informal sector. Now, this data in particular, this report is this actually the survey is known as the Annual Survey of Unincorporated Enterprises, and the data has been released after many years. The last data was released in 2015-16. Now, this gives a very important data when it comes to the informal sector, right? Now, this is obviously a part of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, if you look at the data, it says that there has been a reduction in the number of workers, So if you compare the 2015-16 with 2022-23, you would see that the number of workers has reduced from 11.13 crores in 15-16 to 10.96 crores, right? Also, on the other side, that there has been an increase in the number of unincorporated entities, right? That is from 6.34 crore in 15-16 to 6.50 crores, right? Now, see, the reason for the reduction in the number of informal workers is primarily attributed to the impact of three shocks. The first has been the demonetization. So it was the demonetization of 2016 which led to this. Second has been the rollout of GST in 2017. That was the second shock. Third has been the COVID-19 pandemic. So these three shocks are primarily responsible for reduce in the number of the informal workers. Now, it does not mean that they have formalized. It means that the number of opportunities in informal sector has reduced. Now, 10 states, what needs to be kept in mind is that 10 states in India, they comprise almost 75% of the total informal sector workers in the country. Now, out of these 10 states, we have got first 5 states, that is Maharashtra, Bihar, Gujarat, MP, and Odisha. These states have seen an increase in the number of informal workers. On the other hand, you have the states of Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, which have seen a reduction in the number of informal workers. Now, what needs to be kept in mind is that these states of Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, these states are responsible for having 42% of the total informal workers in the country, right? So that is a huge number. Now, what is the importance of unorganized sector in India? See, the first thing is that it contributes heavily when it comes to the country's gross value added. More than 44%. Second, that it employs more than 75% of the workforce when it comes to non-agriculture enterprises, right? More than 75%. Next is that this informal sector, it has been responsible for having a good employment generation capacity, and it has a lot of absorption capacity of the labor force, specifically when there is a slowdown in the formal sector. So when you have a slowdown in the formal sector, it is the informal sector which absorbs the excess labor force, right? Now, what are the issues when it comes to the informal sector in India? See, the first is that the employment conditions are precarious, right? So the employment, for example, as I said, there is no job security. There's limited social security. The working conditions are very poor, right? So these are the characteristics of the informal sector. Next is unsustainable livelihoods. Please understand that most of the jobs in the informal sector are of seasonal nature. For example, agriculture laborers, right? This causes financial distress, right? So that is one thing. Next is social vulnerability. Obviously, there is limited social security or no social security when it comes to informal sector. And then that leads to bad social conditions, right? Sometimes it also leads to bad health conditions because they have to bear high out-of-pocket expenditure, right? That is one thing. Next is there are occupational hazards. Most of the jobs in the informal sector, they have occupational hazards. High occupational hazards. For example, take the case of waste pickers, take the case of recyclers. They have to face health risks. Next is institutional challenges. They face institutional challenges because there are lack of legal protections. They have no legal protection, right? So this is one issue. Next is they're vulnerable to harassment, especially when it comes to the women and the children. They are made to work for long hours and they're also prone to exploitation. So these are some of the very crucial issues when it comes to the informal sector. Now, what have been the government's actions, interventions when it comes to the informal sector? The first is the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act of 2008. Now, this empowers both the central and the state government to come up with those schemes, with those policies, so that there can be an enhancement in the social conditions. For example, life insurance, for example, maternity benefits, right? Different schemes can be undertaken by the central or the state government. Next is the Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana. Now, this provides a life cover of 2 lakh rupees, right, at a very small premium amount, right? So this provides life insurance to these workers. Next is Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana. Now, this scheme aims at providing the pensions to the unorganized workers, right? So this is also a very important scheme. Next is the Atal Pension Yojana. Now, this scheme actually aims to universalize the social protection, and it tries to enhance the financial backup to these unorganized persons. Next is eShram portal, very important. Now, this eShram portal, it actually has registered many unorganized workers, and it is trying to give them a unique number. Through that portal, through that number, they can access other social benefits, right? So it's like a Aadhaar number that these workers are getting a unique ID, and on the basis of that unique ID, they can access different social benefits. Next is Pradhan Mantri Street Vendors Atmanirbhar Nidhi, also known as PM Swanidhi. Now, this aims to provide collateral-free credit, microcredit to the street vendors so that they can start their own sustainable livelihoods. Next is the MGNREGA, that is Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, this aims to provide guaranteed employment to the adults of the rural households, right? So these are some of the schemes which the government has come up with for the informal sector. Now, what should be the way forward? See, the first is that there has to be a universal coverage. What do we mean by this? See, we can actually leverage the platforms like eShram portal. So these portals can be leveraged. Then we can have a repository of who all are the members, and then we can provide sort of these social benefits to these people across different industries. Next is simplifying the registration process, very important. Now, if we want that these informal enterprises should be converted to formal enterprises, there has to be more formalization. So we need to first simplify the registration process. Moreover, we can take the help of self-help groups. So self-help groups can be used so that they can provide adequate and timely credit, and then they can have their own sustainable livelihood opportunities. Next is swift implementation of labor codes. In fact, even in today's newspaper on page 13 of the Delhi edition, there has been a mention that the government is putting a lot of efforts to implement the labor codes. However, a care needs to be taken that there needs to be a proper consultative mechanism. Different stakeholders should be consulted before implementing these labor codes. Next is tailored schemes, very important. See, for example, we have this PM Swanidhi for the street vendors. There needs to be tailored scheme, for example, for agriculture workers, for example, for construction workers, so that they can reap the benefits of these social protection schemes. Next is extending social security. Very important. There are some social security provisions, for example, maternity benefits, which are available to people in the formal sector. So we need to also extend these benefits to the informal sector. For example, compensating for accident or let's say the death, right? Or for example, the maternity benefit. Next is skill development and upgradation. Very important. See, again, as I said, if we want a smooth transition from the informal sector of the workers to the formal sector, that is formalization, then we need to focus upon skill development. Moreover, what we are witnessing is Industrial Revolution 4.0. Right. So this demands that we need to adequately invest in skill upgradation. Next is formalization incentives. Government needs to have those schemes in place where these enterprises, these informal enterprises can be incentivized so as to have a proper transition to the formal enterprises, right? So that is what is needed. So what we see is that informal enterprises, these informal sector, they are very important when it comes to India's economy. But we need to have these steps in place so as to ensure more productive workforce and a more inclusive development paradigm, right? So that is what we need to follow. Now, before we go to the next article, there's a mains practice question. It says, the informal sector plays an indispensable role in Indian economy, especially in case of a slowdown in formal sector. Highlight the issues plaguing the sector and the way forward. So do write an answer on this. So the next article is with respect to the Collegium System. So recently, the Supreme Court has recommended names for the appointment of Supreme Court judges and some of the High Court judges. So we'll see what Collegium system is all about, how it has evolved, what are the issues, and what should be the way forward. Now, this is with respect to GS3 structure, organization, functioning of the executive and judiciary. Now, what is the Collegium system? See, it is a system of appointment and transfer of judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court, which has evolved through the judgments of the Supreme Court and not by an act of parliament, right? So it is the judgment of Supreme Courts which has actually formulated this Collegium system and not an act of an parliament. Now, if you look at the Article 124 subclause 2 and Article 217, now the article says that the Supreme Court judges should be appointed by the President after consultation with such judges of the High Courts and the Supreme Court as the President may deem necessary. The Chief Justice of India is to be consulted in all the appointments except his or her own. Next is the Article 217. It talks about the High Court judges should be appointed by the President after consultation with the Chief Justice of India and the Governor of the state. The Chief Justice of the High Court concerned too should be consulted. Now, please understand that the most important words in these lines, in these articles, is the consultation. And it is this word, the consultation, which has actually evolved this system of collegium system, right? Now, how the evolution has taken place. See, it was in the year 1981 that we had the famous case of S.P. Gupta versus Union of India, also known as the first judge's case, where the Supreme Court categorically said that the word consultation does not mean concurrence, right? That the word consultation does not mean concurrence. Right. And it also said that the recommendation of the Chief Justice of India, it can be actually avoided by the executive if there are cogent reasons. So it was this decision of the Supreme Court, that is in the first judge's case, that led to the primacy of the executive when it comes to the appointment of judges for the next 12 years. Then it was the second case, that is Supreme Court Advocates on Record versus Union of India in the year 1993, also known as the second judge's case. Now, it was in this case that the Supreme Court clearly said that the word consultation means concurrence. However, it should not just be based on what the CJI has recommended. It should be based on the institutional opinion, that is the Chief Justice of India plus the two senior most judges, right? So that is how the collegium system started. Then it was in the year 1998. That is also known as the third judge's case. Now, in this case, what happened was the President of India sought the advice from the Supreme Court under Article 143. Now, in this case, Supreme Court very clearly said that it actually expanded this collegium system to the CJI plus the four senior most judges. It did a change, an alteration, where it said that now the collegium has to comprise the Chief Justice of India and the four senior most judges. Next, it was the fourth judge's case of 2015, where the Supreme Court struck down the 99th Constitutional Amendment Act and also the NJAC, National Judicial Appointments Commission Act of 2014. Right, as it said that it actually infringed upon the independence of the judiciary, and then it retained the collegium system. So that is how you see the evolution of the collegium system in India. Now, if you talk about who heads the collegium system, or what is the composition of the collegium system in Supreme Court and respective High Courts. So in the Supreme Court, it is, as I said, the Chief Justice and the four senior most judges. And then in the High Court, you have the Chief Justice of that particular High Court and the two senior most judges of that particular High Court. So that is how you have the collegium system of the Supreme Court and the High Courts. Now, what are the issues related to the collegium system in India? The first is that there have been allegations that there is complete exclusion of the executive. That is, the decisions which are taken by the collegium system, they are in complete secrecy, right? They are not accountable. The judiciary is not accountable to anyone, be it the executive or be it the legislature. They are not accountable. After making a recommendation that has to be accepted by they can only delay it, but ultimately the recommendations which are being sent by the judiciary, they have to be accepted by the executive. Next is, there are chances of favoritism and nepotism. Now, this is one of the very serious concerns with respect to the collegium system. There are no specific benchmark or there are no specific criteria with respect to the appointment process, right? And there have been allegations that there has been nepotism when it comes to the appointment to judiciary, right? Also, the whole process is very non-transparent, right? There is no transparency in the whole process. Next is that it is against the principle of checks and balance. See, in India, we have got the three organs: the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. Now, all these three, each of them, they are partially independent, right? And there is a very good mechanism of checks and balance so that they can have a check on the other, right? But this systems, it actually, it perpetuates a mechanism where the judiciary is not accountable to anyone, right? So there the mechanism of checks and balance fails. Next is, it's a closed door mechanism. See, all the proceedings which happen with respect to the appointment of these judges, with respect to the recommendations, they are a closed door mechanism. There is no permanent secretariat with respect to the appointment of judges, right? So there are no minutes of the meetings, what discussions have taken place. So they arbitrarily meet up and then they take a call, right? So that is what we call a closed door mechanism. Next is, there is no provision for reservation in judicial appointments from the marginalized communities. So for the government jobs, we already have the reservation. But when it comes to the judicial appointment, there is no such provision as we can say for the reserved categories, right? So that is where there is the issue, that there is a very low representation from the SCs, STs and the OBCs in the judiciary. Then there is unequal representation. Now this is primarily in reference to the underrepresentation of the women in the judiciary, right? So women are, there is sort of a patriarchal mindset, right? So that is where we see the underrepresentation of women in the judiciary. Now, what should be the way forward? First is that there needs to be a creation of a permanent and independent body, right? Be it through a constitutional amendment or be it through or an act of the parliament. We need to have a body where the judiciary also agrees on this and the executive also agrees on this and the legislature also agrees on this, that we need to have a body where the judicial appointments can take place with proper transparent norms, right? There needs to be proper accountability norms. Then there needs to be adequate focus on the inclusivity from the marginalized sections. We need to make sure that the appointments which are actually done for the Supreme Court judges or the High Court judges, they also should be, the judges should be from these communities, right? They should be so that these communities can feel strengthened, more empowered. Next is, we can incorporate the best practices around the world. For example, you have the appointment process in the US, where the president actually recommends the name and the Senate finally agrees on it, right? Then you have a selection commission in the United Kingdom, right? So these practices, learnings can be made from these practices and make sure that, see, definitely the doctrine of separation of power, which is highlighted in Article 50, is very important. But that should not result in a condition where the judiciary has taken all the power on its own for deciding the judges which are to be appointed to the Supreme Court or the High Court. There needs to be proper accountability mechanism. There needs to be a proper transparent mechanism so as to ensure that there are right people who are actually heading the judiciary. Now, before we go to the next topic, I have a question for you. So this is a 2017 question which says, critically examine the Supreme Court's judgment on the National Judicial Appointment Commission Act of 2014 with reference to the appointment of judges in the higher judiciary in India. Next, we have a prelims question which says, consider the following statement. The 44th Amendment to the Constitution of India introduced an article placing the election of the Prime Minister beyond the judicial review. Next is, the Supreme Court of India struck down the 99th Amendment to the Constitution of India as being violative of the independence of the judiciary. Which of the statements above is or are correct? One only, two only, both one and two, or neither one and two? Let me see who answers first in the comment section. So the next article is with respect to the Planetary Defence. So the Indian Space Research Organization is very keen on participating in a mission, and the mission involves the redirection of a particular asteroid which would come near the Earth at around 32,000 kilometers near the Earth in the year 2029, right? So the mission involves the redirection of this particular asteroid whose name is Apophis, right? Now this is with respect to GS3, space, science and technology. Now see, we have got different space objects. For example, we have got the asteroids. Now, what are the asteroids? They are rocky metallic objects which move around the sun, mostly leftovers from the formation of the solar system, right? And those asteroids which are less than 1 meter in dia, they are known as the meteoroids. Next is, we have got the meteor. Now, what is a meteor? These are the streaks of light which are produced when the asteroid or meteoroid, it enters the atmosphere of the Earth, right? And because of the friction, you have got the streak of light which emerges. Then you have got the meteorite, that is the unburned fragment of the asteroid that reaches the Earth's surface. Now, please understand that these are something which are threats from the space. That is, if they enter the Earth's atmosphere, there's a possibility of the collision with the ground, right? There's a possibility that it does not completely burn, right? And it might reach the ground, and that might create a sort of a catastrophe, right? So there are mechanisms in place. There have been different space organizations around the world. They are actually working upon institutionalizing these mechanisms, and these mechanisms are known as planetary defense mechanisms. Now, these are the efforts to monitor and to protect the Earth from the asteroids, comets, and other objects in the space. That is what we call as planetary defense. Now, what are the threats? So if we take an example, we have a particular we know that the dinosaurs, they were extinct, and the possible reason has been the impact of the asteroid which caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Then we had a particular asteroid, that is Chelyabinsk in Russia, which exploded over Russia in 2013, about 20 meter in its widest. Now the size of this asteroid Apophis is around 450 meter at its widest. Now, what are the plans for Apophis? Different space organization, as I just said, NASA, for example, they're collaborating with each other, and that is where the ISRO is keen on participating in this mission. Now, the learning can be taken from the DART mission of NASA, that is Double Asteroid Redirection Test. Now, this has already taken place, and what the whole objective was that a particular spacecraft, through a kinetic impact, it would try to change the direction of the orbit, right? So you can see you have this DART mission which has already been accomplished, right? So you have the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, right? Now, in this test, you have a particular asteroid, which is Didymos, and then you have got a smaller asteroid which is actually orbiting this particular asteroid, and this is Dimorphos, right? So what this mission did was that you had a particular satellite, and this satellite, it created a kinetic impact which actually changed the direction. So originally, you see that the new orbit has been this. So originally the orbit was this. A particular kinetic impact was, it was impacted, and then it changed the direction of the orbit. And this is the new orbit. So that is what we are planning for the same mission, that is for Apophis, right? So let's see what happens, and it is really something very good that ISRO is collaborating for something. And we recently saw, even in today's newspaper, that ISRO has been expanding the horizons when it comes to the space exploration, right? And that is because that the small tasks, the mundane tasks, the redundant tasks, they have been given to the other players, and it is focusing upon the core research and development aspects, right? So this becomes very important, and you need to be aware of what planetary defense is all about. So the next article is with respect to a very important climatological phenomena, and that is known as heat dome. So we have got the western part of the US, specifically the state of California, which is witnessing a very high temperature, heat wave like condition. And this is primarily because of the establishment of the heat dome. We'll see what heat dome is all about. Now, this is with respect to GS3, environment and climate change. Now, see, just imagine that you have a particular place, and this place is actually covered by something like a dome, right? And inside the place, you have got very hot conditions, right? That is what resembles like a heat dome. So we'll look into what the formation process is all about. So what happens is, how to define a heat dome is that it is a high pressure system which traps the warm air over a region. So you have got high pressure region all around, and inside that you have got a particular dome like structure where you have got warm and hot airs, and this intensifies so as to increase the temperature, right? So you have got the western part of the US where you are witnessing this heat dome. Now, this generally stays for a few days, but what we are witnessing is that it has been prolonging, right? It has been extending, primarily because of the anthropogenic effects of the climate change, right? Now, why is it related to the phenomena of jet stream? See, what happens is that we have got the jet stream, right? So they move in a particular fashion, in a curvy fashion all around the planet, right? What happens in the summers is that they move to the northern part. So there's a shift from the south towards the north. So there's a shift from the south towards the north. Now, as this shift takes place, what happens is that you have got the hot and stagnant air which expands upward. So this hot air from the down, it goes inside this loop, right? What happens is then this jet stream, which comprises of strong winds, right? It creates high pressure atmospheric conditions above these warm conditions, right? Then what happens is, then once you would have hot conditions at the ground, the air would try to rise, right? But since you have got very high winds above it, they would try to compress it. And when the winds would compress them, there would be an exaggeration in the hot conditions. Hot conditions would be exaggerated, right? So what happens is under the dome, the air sinks and compresses, releasing more heat. Now, as the winds move, the hot air, the jet stream traps the air where it sinks and resulting in heat waves. So obviously, once you will have the compression, what would happen is that there would be a resultant condition of a heat wave, very hot conditions, temperature to the tune of 50 degrees Celsius, right? So what we see is, as I've told you, that these jet streams, they are the wave-like pattern. And when these waves get bigger and elongated, high pressure system gets stuck, and then inside that you have the creation of the heat dome, right? Now, as I said, the climate change is something which is enhancing this, right? Because you have the climate change, human induced climate change, and this is resulting in increased rising temperature, and then the jet stream will become more wavy. Once they become more wavy, they will trap more heat, and once they'll trap more heat, it would result into more intense and longer heat dome conditions. So that is what you need to know about the heat dome. So coming to the prelim snippet section, we have got the first article as the India's first deep water transshipment port, that is the Vizhinjam International seaport, right? So what we saw was that the mothership, a first mothership. So what is a mothership? It is primarily a very big ship from where you have the unloading of the sort of containers, and then the small ships, they proceed to their own destinations. So you have got the one mothership, right? So this mothership carrying a cargo from Xiamen in China, it has actually reached this port in Kerala. Now this is being touted as India's first deep water transshipment port. Now this transshipment is very important because India, it was trying for many years to emerge as a transshipment hub. Right now, once you have got the cargoes who are coming from the Americas or we're coming from the East Asia, there one of the most important transshipment hub was that of Singapore. But now with this port, India has also emerged as a hub for transshipment, right? Now, what is transshipment? Transshipment means the unloading of goods from one ship and it's loading onto the another to complete a journey for the further destination, right? So you have got the direct shipping where the origin port, a direct route, then you have got the destination port. In the transshipment, what happens is that the loading containers, they are taken from the origin port to the intermediate port, and from there, let's say you have got different directions to where the containers are to be ferried, right? So we can have these transshipment hubs from where you can have different ships going towards the different destinations. So that is where this becomes important. Next is the CUTS International. So we have a very leading important think tank, and this is based in India, right? So that's the reason it becomes important. So it's a leading think tank and it works on the economic and the policy issues, right? And it started as a small voluntary consumer NGO in Rajasthan in the year 1983. Now the CUTS has over time progressed into a very big policy research and network-based advocacy group. Primarily, it works in three domains. That is the rules-based trade, second is effective regulation, and the third is the good governance, right? Now, this has expanded to various parts of the world. For example, we have the overseas resource centers in Geneva, Hanoi, Nairobi, Lusaka, and Accra, right? So that's the reason it becomes important. Next is the Central Industrial Security Force. So the CISF is a central armed police force under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Now this was set up under the Act of the Parliament in 1969. Now the primary mission of the CISF is to provide security to large institutions, be it the government or the private. Now one thing needs to be kept in mind that it was the amendment in 2009 where the CISF was also given the added responsibility for maintaining the security at private places in lieu for fees, right? So we have the CISF at different locations. For example, we have got the CISF in the Infosys locations around the country. For example, we have got CISF at the Jamnagar refinery, right? So that is the reason we have got the CISF at the Delhi Airport Express line. So CISF provides the protection to non-nationalized industry also, corporate sector. Then it is also responsible sometimes for the university's security. For example, we have the Shanti Niketan, right? We have got the Vishwa Bharati University where the security is being provided by the CISF. Next, as I said, that it also provides the airport security. It also provides the security for Delhi Metro. there is a particular special security group in the CISF itself which is responsible for the VIP security, right? Then it is the only central armed police force which has a very specialized fire wing of its own, right? So that is the reason CISF becomes very important. Next is the Self-Employed Women's Association, very important. So this is a trade union and it is a non-profit organization. And this was founded by a very important, very renowned social activist, Ella Bhatt, in the year 1972. Right now, it has a membership of more than 1.5 million women, and it has been constantly working. You must have heard about Seva in different, for example, domains, especially with reference to the self-help group. So Seva has been promoting the self-help group for making sure that the women are empowered, for making sure that they have got sustainable livelihood opportunities, right? So what the main focus is on improving the lives of women who work in informal sector jobs. Now these women often face significant challenges. Obviously, lack of job security, lack of finance, social conditions are not good, right? So in order to make sure that they have adequate livelihood options so that they can improve their social standards, we have got Seva, and it provides different opportunities or resources through the self-help groups. Now, Seva works to provide its member with the support and resources, as I said, self-help groups. Now, many of these sort of schemes or acts by the parliament which have been in place, they're inspired because of the Seva's work. So we have got the Unorganized Workers Social Security Act, the NRLM, that is National Rural Livelihood Mission, or the Street Vendors Act. They are seen as successes of Seva's struggle. Now we have got the PM Swanidhi, right? As I just said in today's session, that it aims to provide microcredit to these street vendors. Now it is being seen as inspired by Seva's microfinance model. One thing is, which I can remember, is that we have Anubandh. So it was the Anubandh sort of platform which Seva came up with during the COVID times, so as to provide a link between the buyers and the sellers, so as to make sure that the fires in the kitchen, they are constantly burning, right? So that is where this organization becomes important. So that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you.